Welcome everyone to this great webinar today. Thank you for joining me and Leadership Tallahassee for Balance Competing Interests to Deliver Results. I am Sha'Ron James and I will be your facilitator for today. Before we get started, we'd like to find out who we have here. So I would like for my co-host, Amanda Wiggins of Leadership Tallahassee, who will be helping me facilitate today's webinar, to show you the first poll. So our first poll is, what's your industry? If you would take a quick moment to answer the poll, it will help guide the discussion as we have a better sense of who is with us today. We can end the poll now. Not surprisingly, I saw quite a few people enter. We have 47% representing the not-for-profit sector, 21% representing small business. We have government as well as banking and finance and other. So again, thank you for joining us. I want to start by giving you a quick overview of what to expect today. Again, you have joined the Balance Competing Interests to the Balance Competing Interests webinar. Actually, this is the first time we have done this particular webinar and the first time I've done this presentation via Zoom. So this is somewhat casual in nature, but we also have quite a couple ground rules that I would like to share with you as we get started. So we're going to cover a couple things. The first question is, what type of webinar is this? So if you saw the promo for this webinar, you may have noticed that we said that this was an interactive webinar. So what that means is, I'm sure many of you have been on Zoom calls and meetings, particularly over the last month or so. And it's interesting because Zoom profiles are beginning to be established. So if you are the multitasking Zoom person that sits on a Zoom call and does a myriad of other things, you check emails, you feed your dog, you do all sorts of things, we ask that you not do that. Also, if you are the shrinking flower profile Zoomer, which I can be from time to time, that's where you really don't want anyone to call on you and you go in and out from your live self to your name. We also don't want you to do that. But other than that, the standard ground rules for Zoom will apply. We are in the Zoom meeting environment as opposed to the Zoom webinar environment, which means that everyone here is expected to fully participate. So we ask that if you're not speaking, that you mute your microphone and that you be mindful of any background noise. We also find it very important that you be fully engaged. Again, as I mentioned, this is interactive, and a portion of today's webinar will be in the small group area. We'll break into small groups where you all will be given an opportunity to meet and discuss some really important issues in a small group setting. So those are the ground rules. I think we are ready to jump right in. So the first question is, what is a right? And if you have the, I think all of you should have the chat function available to you. And I'm also able to see many of you while we're doing this portion of the webinar, but I'm going to ask a series of questions. And so you all can answer. Raise your hand and I will actually unmute you for a quick answer. So the first question is, what is a right? Can anyone share what they think a right actually is? And if not, I am going to call on people I know, like Miss LaShawn Gordon. I am going to call on you. What is a right?
I'm just getting ready to raise my hand. I think of when I think of rights, I think of kind of like what you're born with. You know, there are certain things that because you are an individual, you have the right to. So that's what I think of when I think of rights. Something that somebody can't take away from you because it's your God-given right.
That's a great answer, and that is actually the correct answer. As LaShawn mentioned, a right is something that you're given, is something that you're born with, and it's something that can't be taken away from you. Yeah, Dan McGrew says in the chat, a right is something you have collectively decided as a group that everyone should have access to. Absolutely, Dan. I think that is also a great answer of what a right actually is. And so today we're going to talk about a couple things. We're going to talk about our rights, and we're going to talk about the rights that we have as leaders and our role in balancing those rights and those interests for the greater good. So this part of the webinar really is something that I consider the Are You Smarter Than a Fifth Grader portion of the webinar, because it kind of goes over some fundamental things that we learn in civics or American history about the basic rights that we have as Americans. And it's important that we remember what those rights actually are. I actually conducted this presentation and have conducted this presentation for elementary school children. And it's interesting to hear their perspective about the rights that we have. But I want to hone in on some of the rights that we have. And my next question is, the first 10 amendments of the Constitution are called what? Can anyone remember from your days in civics or in any other classes, or just being an American, what those first 10 are? I'm able to see the chat, so if someone wants to jump into the chat, thank you, Casey Grigsby, who said that the first 10 amendments of the Constitution are the Bill of Rights. That is absolutely correct. So you'll see on your screen a list of rights that are guaranteed to us under the Constitution and are considered the Bill of Rights. So can anyone share why you think the Bill of Rights are important? Why did the Founding Fathers give us these rights, and why are they important to us? Anyone want to share?
Becky, I have a hard time chatting. I think they were given to us because these are rights that were being taken away from them by the colonies and the king.
That is absolutely correct. And if you look at the list, we have freedom of speech, we have the right to bear arms, we have right to legal counsel, right to protection from cruel and unusual punishment, freedom of press, right to jury trial, freedom of religion, the right to peaceably assemble, protection from self-incrimination, which is testifying against oneself in a criminal trial, and the right to protection from unreasonable searches and seizure. So these rights are, again, what we consider as Americans as fundamental by its very nature. So I'd like to just take one quick second for you all to take a look at the list, kind of digest what those rights are and what they mean to you. Now we're gonna fast forward, and this is gonna get really interesting. It's gonna zoom, literally, it's gonna zoom past really fast after this. And so you'll see on this slide, it says it is 2050. And there has been an invasion. So imagine we are still here. It's 2050. We have survived the coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic. Medical technology has increased and we're still alive. It's 2050, but something unfortunate has happened to us. And what's happened is we have been invaded by aliens. Now let that sink in for a moment. It's 2050. We're here in America. We have our televisions on and we see it come on the television that we have been invaded. Our country has been invaded by aliens. So what's interesting about that, if you stick with the simulation, and I know we're all, as leaders, questioning, we're all very skeptical right now just by our very nature, but just stick with me. We've been invaded by aliens, it's 2050, and the aliens have said that we as Americans have too many rights, that for whatever reason, we are spoiled as Americans, and they just don't understand why we don't appreciate the rights that we have. We haven't really shown a great appreciation. And so they're demanding that we make a decision as to which of the 5 rights we are going to keep. They've taken us over and they've said to us, we can only keep 5 of our rights. So the list is up again. And my question to you individually is take a moment, about a minute or so, to look at the list, and I want you to select the 5 rights that you want to keep as an American. So we'll pause for about 30 seconds or so for you all to take a look at the list and select individually the 5 rights that you want to keep. Keep in mind that if you choose not to select the 5 rights, the aliens are going to take all of the rights. So it's important that each of you participate and make that decision because it could really turn out bad for us. So now that you've done that, if you, we'd like for you to do another quick poll. So Amanda, do you mind putting up poll question number 2? So the second question is, which right under the Bill of Rights is most important to you as an individual? This particular poll, we're interested in you picking one right that is important to you. And we're going to actually continue to proceed through our presentation. So now that you've selected the right that is most important to you as an individual, you have to flex your leadership muscle. And we are going to place you all in small groups. We're going to use the small group function of Zoom. And your task for the next 10 to 15 minutes in your small group is for you to reach consensus as a small group as to what rights, which of the 5 rights you as your small group are willing to fight for. So when we put you in the small group, there are 2 assignments. One, select a spokesperson that will represent your group in our full debrief, and also select someone that will be a scribe that will keep notes and of the discussion that's taking place. So spokesperson, scribe, consensus on the top 5 rights that you are willing to fight to keep as Americans. Everyone is back. And we are going to kick it off. Amanda, did each group know what number they were? No, you didn't know the number. That's fine. So
Okay.
I'm going to call on individuals. Becky Tolnay's group.
That was lucky because I was the spokesperson.
Oh, great.
So we ran out of time. We agreed on religion, assembly, protection from cruel and unusual punishment, and we got to the last two when we were discussing legal counsel versus jury trial, and that's when time ran out. I can tell you that what was left was probably some conversation around self-incrimination, search and seizure, and freedom of speech. Those were the last three that we didn't have time to talk about.
So as your group spokesperson, pick two.
Pick two?
Additional ones, yes.
Two additional ones?
I have freedom of religion, peaceably assemble, and self-incrimination for your group.
Oh, cruel and unusual, freedom from cruel and protection from cruel and unusual punishment.
All right. So thank you for that. Dan McGrew.
I will defer to Jasmine, who led our group.
Thanks. Our group had a hard time, honestly. We were only able to eliminate two, and then we were having a final discussion on the top five when we ran out of time. So what we had left was freedom of religion, freedom of speech, right to bear arms, right to protection from unreasonable searches and seizures, right to protection from cruel and unusual punishment. Though two that we couldn't decide on were right to peaceably assemble and freedom of press.
So Jasmine, why did you all have difficulty with those two? What was the discussion centered around?
Because it was, if you're in the middle of an alien invasion, how are you going to be able to express your discontent with what's going on? And so I said freedom of press, because without freedom of press, you just have state-run media and you are really not being informed on what's actually happening. And then right to peaceably assemble, some people thought, well, if it's an invasion, are we actually going to be going out to protest? But even if you aren't, it's still important to have the protection and the option to do that. So we had a hard time with honestly deciding between the three: freedom of speech, right to peaceably assemble, and freedom of press.
Great, thank you. LaShawn Gordon's group. Okay. So your group is already gone. What about Rebecca Dennis? Has your group gone?
No, we have not. And in my group, I had Nicole Everett and then Casey Grigsby. So we came to consistence for our 5: freedom of speech to speak out against the aliens, whether that's on social media. And then religion, we picked freedom of religion because the aliens could have their own religion that could come down, and Casey had a good point that maybe their religion is really violent and that they would be forcing that upon us. We did right to bear arms in case we need to defend ourselves against the aliens. Not all our weapons are taken away in case they become violent against us. We did freedom of the press was an important one for us as well, because with that, getting our information, as you were saying, from the news about the aliens, if we don't have freedom of press, the aliens could be influencing their own narrative into us and on the news, so that could be an influence as well. And then we did right to peacefully assemble, to assemble against the aliens. And Jasmine had a really good point of, with all that's going on, are we going to be able to assemble? But it's still important to have that right. So that was our group.
Thank you. So Rebecca, tell me, run through your list again for me.
Freedom of speech, freedom of religion, right to bear arms, freedom of press, and right to peacefully assemble.
Thank you, Rebecca.
You're welcome.
Liz Joyner.
So hold on, let me look at our notes. So our group was Ryan, Aaron, Gina, and Lena, and we picked freedom of religion, freedom of speech as our first two that we thought were most important. agreed on freedom of the press. And those seem like sort of the really foundational things that to us dictated really who we are. And then freedom, then we were sort of in a hurry for the last two, and we picked freedom to peaceably assemble, again, being just very foundational to who we are as Americans. And then we sort of tried to pick what the sort of the cluster of legal rights that was most important, and which of the, excuse my cat, which of the those needed to be prominent, and we picked legal counsel that maybe that would help with some of the other ones that were really critical, like search and seizure. Interestingly, we actually didn't even get to bear arms, and I think one of the things that makes this a really fascinating exercise is that while I wouldn't put that up without the idea that aliens had come, you know, there's a pretty strong argument that we want to keep that right with aliens leading us. So it's interesting that under those particular circumstances, it would change around.
Thank you, Liz. That's great. We have group 4 was, we have Judge McKinney, Kenneth Pratt, Shamika Jones, and Talithia Edwards. Who was your spokesperson?
This is Kenneth. I was the spokesperson. So interestingly enough, freedom of speech was something that we all of us agreed on. It was the only thing that we all agreed on. But it was we also thought that the freedom of the press could be wrapped up in that freedom of speech.
So did you select freedom of press or just freedom of speech?
No, we did not. We did not. The next one was the right to bear arms, which interestingly enough, as the male in the group, I did not have that one selected, but the other ladies did. They were ready to fight. So that we did select that one. Then we had the right to legal counsel, was our third selection. We thought that was extremely important as well. Didn't want to lose our lawyers. And then the right to religion was our fourth one. And then finally, the right to assemble.
Thank you, Kenneth. And I believe our last group is group 5. Barbara Boone, who was your spokesperson?
So it turned out, I swore I wasn't going to do it, but everybody was just way too nice. So the other group members were Tiffany Baker, Robbie Cunningham, and Eliza Chase. And I'm going to give Eliza a heads up that I want you to share what you shared about the right to bear arms in a minute. So get ready to unmute. So the 5, I went ahead and shared the 5 I had picked just to get us started, because we were sort of at a loss. We didn't have the list in front of us, and then I pulled it up. So that was helpful. So these were the 5 that we agreed upon. Freedom of speech, the right to trial by jury, freedom of the press, right to peaceably assemble, and right to protection from unreasonable searches and seizures. My original list had the right to bear arms, and that seems to always cause a discussion. And so Eliza made a good point about why that didn't necessarily needed to be one of the 5 rights. So Eliza, if you would share that, that'd be awesome.
Sure, and I'll also share something that Tiffany Baker said as well. So my point was that in a world where we were being taken over by aliens, we wouldn't necessarily recognize them as a government or their right to take us over. And so naturally, just as in colonial times, we rejected the British and we took up arms even when they said that we couldn't. We would do the same thing in this instance. And then Tiffany said that one of the rights that we were looking at, and I believe we chose this one, is that you can't do a search in someone's house without their consent. And so her point was that if we uphold this right that you can't search someone's house without their consent, you wouldn't know in the first place whether they have weapons or not. So I just wanted to share on that.
That's those are really good points. One thing I always like to do when I do this exercise is to compare some of your responses to the 5th graders. And the issue of the right to bear arms actually came up in a class that I did. And one of the things that they brought up is they're aliens. We don't know what type of matter they are. So the whole idea that you could shoot it and it would retreat is, that's such an adult, very basic understanding of an alien. So that was just something that was funny that the kids brought up as they were discussing their rights. So we're actually getting close to time. And one thing I think that is evident is that this is a conversation that can take place for forever, for a long time. There are a lot of rights and a lot of things for us to discuss, for us to balance and to weigh. But I want to point out a couple things from the results. So the top results for the entire group were the right to peaceably assemble, freedom of religion, freedom of press, freedom of speech, and the right to bear arms. Those were the top 5. Interestingly enough, the ones, and this is pretty normal and doing this exercise, the ones that got very few responses were the right to legal counsel, of which I always take issue with as a lawyer, the right to protection from cruel and unusual punishment, only got 2 votes. The right to jury trial only got 1, and I think Barbara Boone, that was your group that voted for that. Do you mind taking a quick second to speak to why that was important to your group?
Well, I wish I had some words of wisdom, but it was suggested by one of the members when we deleted the right to bear arms, and so we were running out of time. So we just used that one. So I apologize, I don't have more to say about it.
That's okay. That's also very helpful, because another point that always comes out of this activity is the process of governance. Because essentially, as a small group, each of you were your own state or country, or your own legislature or your own leadership. And so you had to come up with a process to, one, select leadership, a spokesperson or a scribe. You also had to reach some consensus, which if you think about the role that government plays, particularly the legislative branch of government, and their efforts to reach consensus on really balancing competing interests, that's what you had 10 minutes to do. One of the things that I think was most uncomfortable to everyone was that you ran out of time, that there was so much more that you wanted to share, so much more you wanted to discuss. You really wanted to advocate. I know several lawyers are on the webinar, and I'm sure you wanted to really zealously advocate for the right that you thought was important, but time was an issue, and you had to weigh the interests of everyone that was a part of the group. So again, you all did a poll midway through, which was which right under the Bill of Rights is most important to you. And freedom of speech won as the number one right that was important to 35% of the folks that participated. Is there any one person, and you can literally raise your hand, that would like to speak to why freedom of speech is such an important right? Dan?
It's so fundamental to our way of life in America, and I don't think you even realize how much you say on a day-to-day basis, just in your private groups, private friends. You can open Facebook and see everybody's ideas, and the minute that gets shut down, and you're only allowed to say certain things, I think there's just an envelope of fear that would be instituted that you wouldn't be able to operate under any other conditions. That's why it was number one for me. And I think it's just so critical to our way of life and our way of expression, and then how we as citizens influence government. And the minute that's gone, I think all of our power as citizens goes away.
That's so true. And as we conclude this activity in this webinar, just a couple things to note in conclusion. Great leaders must balance competing interests to deliver results for the greater good. And hopefully through this exercise, you, one, recognize that we have some fundamental rights as Americans that we should appreciate and we do appreciate. And then there are others that if we had to give up, we probably would. Also, during a time of crisis, this is really, given the fact that we are living through this unprecedented global pandemic, this is really a time where leaders are being challenged to balance results. And so when you watch the news and when you think about all of the competing interests that leaders have to balance, I hope that you leave here with a greater appreciation. And so whether you're leading an organization, a project, your family, a few things that leaders must do. One, you must listen, understand, communicate, build consensus, and ultimately reach a decision. I hope you enjoyed our time today. And one thing I just want us all to remember, particularly Leadership Tallahassee and those of us that lead, remember that we were built for this, and please take the time to not be afraid to lead. So again, thank you for joining us. We look forward to your feedback. Amanda?
Sean Pittman had something he wanted to share real quick. Sorry.
Absolutely, Sean.
I hate, you had such a great close. I hate to mess that up. But but when you talk about freedom of speech, I would just, one of the things that always comes to my mind when we talk about freedom of speech, and we can see it on Facebook and social media, is some of the damage that it can do. I'm all for freedom of speech, but I just wonder if the framers, as smart and brilliant as they clearly were, because we're still operating under their thoughts from that many years ago. I wonder if they ever thought about the internet and social media, and it's such an incredible, one press of a button can have such an incredible impact that I don't know that any of us are still ready for. So I love freedom of speech, but if there's one area that I think needs some modernization, it would be freedom of speech. And that's why it wasn't on my list, not because we don't need it, but it is one area that really needs to be tweaked, I think.
That's a great point. And Barbara?
So Sean, I want you to meet Liz Joyner. She's on the call of the Village Square. I think the two of y'all have lots to talk about.
We've definitely muddled our way through that question over and over again over the years. It's a tough one.
It's very tough, very tough. But I think since that came in number one, I mean, those of us with contrary views needed to be able to say that there's some issues with freedom of speech that I don't think our framers imagined.
You know, Sean, that's a great point. What's also, I think, very important about that point is the need to interpret what the framers and the founding fathers intended and overlay that with where we find ourselves today. And that's something that comes up often. And I know you said I did a great close before. I'm going to do another quick close and invite anyone, and Amanda may tell me that I'm wrong, but if anyone wants to continue this discussion, we can do that. We can do it at another time where we have more time. One of the things about this activity is that it's very rich. It really brings up, especially during the time that we find ourselves in, it brings up issues and concerns that we don't think about on a daily basis. And as leaders, I know that it's difficult for us to put that in a really small box in a really small time. So again, thank you for joining us today. You can email me at sjames@burgersingerman.com. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn, Facebook, or Instagram. I look forward to chatting with you about this and other issues that are before us. So again, thank you for your time. Enjoy the rest of your day, and please stay safe.